the first time you fly this is not actually going to be flying it as a hyperlapse. So that's the time to test to make sure that everything is going to be okay.
There's the original raw file out of it, a little bit more vibrant, a little more color grade to it. But the point of shooting raw is not to fill your hard drive for no reason. It's to give you that latitude and control so you have that creative capability to finish the footage. All right, we're back. And this is part 2 to how did you get that shot? And we're talking about hyperlapses.
How did you get that shot?
So last week we did all the planning and the pre-execution for capturing a hyperlapse of the Golden Ears Bridge. Mm-hmm. This week we're going to go through what happens on the actual shoot, what you need to do with the drone, the settings, everything you need to do to make sure you've got best practices followed for getting the best out of the drone as possible. And then we're going to jump into what the footage actually looks like out of the box, and then also what you can do with the raw photos that you can get by using free tools, Davinci Resolve, to edit the footage into a HDR time lapse. So let's get right into it.
Yeah. So first, we talked about this on the last episode, but in case you didn't watch the last episode, go back and watch it.
Go back and watch it right now.
But Ian, what is a hyperlapse?
A hyperlapse is a moving time lapse. So it's a time lapse where the camera is moving, so your perspective is shifting while you're doing it.
So basically that means multiple photos or either still frames pulled from a video, taken in sequence, edited together into a video.
Yeah, so it's faster than real time.
That's right. Let's talk first about how to set up the aircraft. So you're on site. What do you need to do to set up the aircraft? Well, you want everything in manual. Exposure, shutter speed, white balance. You want that in manual. For the shutter speed, you want it to be as long as you can, where the image that you're capturing still looks good. For this type of hyperlapse, we did this one using the photo version, not doing it as a video. So we set up our Mavic 3 to be still photo and shooting in RAW.
Yeah, so it's going to be a series of photos along a waypoint hyperlapse.
Yeah, so we used the waypoint and hyperlapse, or the waypoint mode in its hyperlapse setting, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then the other thing you need to set, you need to do a little bit of calculation for your frames per second. So you have to think about, okay, the video that is coming out at the end, how many frames per second is it? Standard would be something like 24 frames per second. And then you think 24 frames per second, you want the end video to be 10 seconds long. Simple math, you need 240 frames.
Yeah, so let's take this back a bit. So first thing you need to know when you're going to shoot a hyperlapse, obviously you're going to make a video. What platform are you going to put it onto? Well, YouTube, you have choices of frame rates. You can do 24, 30, or 60 frames a second. If you're going to do 60 frames a second, you're going to make your life difficult because it means you got to shoot a ton of frames, right? You need 600 frames for 10 seconds of video. So 24 frames per second means you're going to need 240 frames for 10 seconds of video. Less photos, easier to shoot.
That's right.
30 frames per second is what this is right now that we're watching. 30 frames, 10 seconds, that's 300 frames you need to take still pictures of. So we're going to aim for 24 frames per second because 24 and 30 visually look the same. 24 is the standard for cinematic footage anyway. So let's go with that. It makes it easier for us to take shots.
So then you have to think about how much time between the frames. What's the consideration for choosing the time between the frames? Like 3 seconds versus 5 seconds versus 10 seconds. How is that going to change at the end?
Yeah.
result?
So if you want to cover a short span of time, then you're going to want a short interval between your still photos. So what that means is the interval will be take a shot, wait X amount of time. So in this case, let's say 5 seconds, take another shot. 5 seconds have passed between these shots, right? Time has passed, time has lapsed. If you wait 10 seconds to get the same 240 frames, it's going to be twice as long, right? That's 240 frames every 10 seconds. So that's 2,400.
There's some math here. So if you have 5 seconds between frames, that means it's going to take 1,200 seconds to get 240 frames. That's 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you want 10 seconds between frames. So my question was like 5 seconds versus 10 seconds. What it's going to do in terms of the video is it's going to be a faster time lapse.
Things are going to move faster.
Things are going to move faster.
Like if you're following the sun's going to move faster across the sky.
But then you have to consider your battery life. So if we wanted to do a 10-second between frames, well, that's 40 minutes. This thing doesn't have 40 minutes of battery life
On
in
a
it.
good day, these are about 43. So you're going to be into return to home and emergency landing.
Yes. So we would not recommend taking it that close to the end of your battery. So I think you ended up selecting 3 seconds between every frame.
Yeah. So for this shoot, it was somewhere around 240 frames. And basically, I think I shot a 15-second time lapse. And I chose 3 seconds between frames. So that means it was about a 20-minute flight to capture the shots. And yeah, so you end up with the 24 frames per second, having at least 10 seconds. I chose 15, so I'd have a bit of buffer.
So when you're the thing where we're getting at here is when you're setting up your drone, you need to there are 2 considerations. What's the time lapse going to look like? And for the time lapse that I want, do I have enough battery to get this shot? Yeah.
Yeah. So battery life, storage, are you going to get the shot? Like in the time span that you're shooting this, in the next 20 minutes is what's going to happen in the time frame that you need it to happen.
So that's setting up the drone. Some other factors, shutter speed. If you have a long exposure, a long shutter speed, your interval can't be shorter than your shutter speed.
Did we talk about manual exposure already?
We talked about setting it to manual.
Okay. So yeah, and let's just jump back to that.
Okay.
So manual exposure, it's really important because you don't want the camera flickering. If you set it to auto exposure and the scene changes throughout the flight, the camera is going to flicker and you're going to get this constant strobing effect throughout your frames. So you absolutely must pick the median exposure for the duration of your shot. So if you're doing a sunset, for example, the scene is going to get darker and darker and darker. So you probably want to overexpose at the start. And that way you're not entirely underexposed at the end of the time lapse.
And fix it in post.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that with what the advantages of RAW is. But like we said in here, you need to set it to shoot in RAW mode, not JPEG mode, so you have that latitude as well. Another really important one, so manual exposure, by that I mean manual aperture, manual shutter speed, and manual ISO, so that none of the 3 parts of the exposure triangle are automatically controlled. You want your aperture to stay constant. You should also set it to manual focus so that it doesn't accidentally switch to some other focal plane and then create a change in your shot, especially if you've got subjects going in front of the drone. So if you've got something close and something far, you want that picked at the start. White balance. As the light changes, the sky color will change, which will throw the white balance into different values. Same thing. Choose the middle of your exposure. So a good idea is to set it to daylight, 5400 to 5600 Kelvin. Set it there, lock it there, don't let it change, right? It's really important that you set that. Not as important though, because you're shooting in RAW, but your basic preview is going to look better to start with. Yeah, that's it. I just wanted to reiterate how important it is that you set the camera into manual exposure and lock out as many variables as possible when you're doing this.
Yeah. So some other factors for planning. I just mentioned shutter speed is long. Your interval can't be shorter than your shutter speed. So if you've got a 1 second exposure, you need at least 1 second interval between.
Yes.
Or else it's gonna look bad. If your shutter speed is too low and your interval is also too low, the hyperlapse will appear blurry.
Yeah. So what we mean by that is, say you're taking a 1 second long exposure per shot. That might be intentional, but it also may be unintentional. And if it's if it's windy or noisy, the drone's moving around a lot on a 1 second exposure, is going to create blur that's unintentional.
Yes. And just to be clear, a low shutter speed means the gate is open for a long time. So it's the longer the shutter speed, the lower the shutter speed is.
Yes.
So
slower.
Yeah. Temperature and wind. So it was a cold day yesterday, or cooler day yesterday. Battery life is affected, but it was a no wind condition. So
yeah,
battery life was reasonable.
Yeah, I saw about 35 to 40 minutes estimated on the battery.
Radio signal strength and interference. So we talked about this in episode 1, but you start from the farthest away that you can go.
Yeah.
And then you start from the farthest away that you can go, and then you come back. But you want to make sure that there's nothing in between that could affect your radio signal.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this in a second, but the first time you fly this is not actually going to be flying it as a hyperlapse.
That's right.
So that's the time to test to make sure that everything is going to be okay. Charge your phone, charge your controller.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're using a smart controller, make sure it's fully charged, and that you have an external power pack potentially for it, because it's going to be running the entire time, of course.
Mm-hmm. And if you're using your phone screen with one of these types, this style of controller,
Yeah.
these will chew your phone battery like no tomorrow.
Yeah. And you can charge your phone from this, but then of course it's going to pull from the controller battery. I saw it. So what's this thing down to? Yeah, it's down to 25%, 30% right now. That's from 3 or 4 time-lapse flights yesterday.
From a full charge, right?
And these things usually last forever.
Yeah.
Right. So that's running my iPhone 15 Pro, charging it while running this, because my phone would not have made it, even though it was fairly high state of charge before this.
And then some human factors.
Yeah, go pee. You're going to be standing there and you need the time lapse to finish. You don't have time to step away from the controller. And yeah.
If you go behind a tree to take a leak, you're beyond visual line of sight.
Well, yeah.
And other things, we talked about this in episode 1, but it was a cooler day yesterday. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. If it's a long hyperlapse like this, bring a folding chair.
Yeah.
Because if you're just standing there in the freezing cold for 20 minutes, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah. And your area might change, right? You might have, like, you're there 20 minutes, you can't really move. So your takeoff and landing area might change as well if you get bystanders coming up.
That's right.
Just be prepared for that too.
And then how to fly the hyperlapse. So you fly it on multiple batteries.
Yes.
You're going to fly the mission once manually and basically keyframe the hyperlapse.
That's right.
So you fly to the end point, you fly to the and keyframes along the way, and you save these as waypoints.
Yeah. So when you're looking at this live stream, probably won't see it now, but we'll put the footage in afterwards. Because I did screen record as we were setting it up. But here's the process. So first flight, you take the full battery, go as far as you away, and set up your waypoints, right? So we're using the waypoint hyperlapse features. We're going to set up our camera exposure first, make sure that all looks good. Choose an ND filter if it's needed, because then you can simulate your exposure and figure out what it's going to be. Once that's done, then you're going to fly to the spot in hyperlapse mode, hit a plus on the bottom of the hyperlapse, and you're going to set your first waypoint. Then you're going to fly to your intermediate or your end waypoints. And as you're doing that, you're reframing the shot so that the shot is focused on the subject that you want it to be. So that's going to include pan, tilt, yaw. Everything's going to be part of that. And you're going to reposition the drone so that it at the end, that's what the end shot will be. Once you've set that, basically it's a keyframe or a waypoint for the location, then you can save that, and then you can choose in what direction you want to do it. So do you want to do it from near to far or from far to near? And you can reverse it.
You want to do it from far to near.
Yeah. So you would then save it, and even though you've set point 1, 2, 3, or you might set your first point at the beginning and then set your last point at the end, you can just reverse it.
Mm-hmm. So for a job like this, or how many waypoints did you use for this one?
So this one's a little weird. So the Golden Ears Bridge there's 4 or 5 cable pillars. Smaller bridges, you might have like an obvious and easy middle point. Like we were doing the previs, we talked about setting a target in the center, and you'd want to like use the grid and the crosshair system on the controller as well, so that you set a target on it and then set your waypoint so it's always looking at the same target. That's going to be the most interesting. I kind of struggled with the framing on this one because it's a long bridge, and because of the way it is, there's not an obvious center. So I probably used 4 waypoints, I think, to set one initial rotation, and then a midpoint, and then another midpoint, and then a last point. So, and then we can set it that way. And then, like I said, you can save that, so then you can fly the same flight path several times and get different lighting conditions.
And this is why you need to bring additional batteries. So this flight was approximately like 3/4 of one battery.
It was like 18 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, so 18 to 20 minutes, so maybe half, but you wouldn't fly a 20-minute mission with a 40-minute battery. You would only fly it once per battery.
Yeah.
To be so that you don't have to fish your drone out of the Fraser River. But so this is why you need to bring multiple batteries and have multiple batteries charged. So then after you plan, you swap in a fresh battery, and the aircraft will fly the mission automatically. Ian hit go on the controller. It flew the mission automatically and captured a bunch of photos, which we are now going to talk about how.
Yeah, so on the actual flight, same thing. take off with a fresh battery, fly up so that you're clear of any obstacles. One thing we didn't talk about is make sure you set your height. What we also didn't talk about on doing this before is make sure you turn on the takeoff button in Nav Drone. So you've got, in this location, we're in controlled airspace, so we make sure that we hit the Nav Drone takeoff on the app before you take off.
And when you land again.
And then when you land again, which I apparently forgot on my second flight, and it didn't warn me. Weird. And which it has in the past. That's surprising. Maybe it's a bug. But the takeoff, get above, make sure that your return to home height is set, make sure your return to home function is set, make sure your home point is set, and make sure everything's working the way it should
all
be.
of your normal checklists, the way that you would fly it normally.
Yeah, don't skip that stuff. Okay, now fly towards your first waypoint and then engage the hyperlapse waypoint. You can go into the menu. I'll show it on the screen as I'm talking in the video. But you go into the top left menu, open that saved hyperlapse, and then you can hit execute. The last thing you need to do is choose your interval, choose your duration, and choose your speed, and then make sure that the camera is in RAW mode.
Yeah,
right?
but that's all done. That's all done on the controller.
That's right.
And you have to be in flight for these things.
The hyperlapse portion, you have to be in flight. You can set everything else before you take off, so you're not burning battery, setting your exposure. Just point it at the general direction of the what you're going to shoot, so that you get a good idea of what the exposure is going to look like. On the screen also, you'll see I've got a histogram and the grid system and the overexposure warnings. So that'll be important as well to make sure. On my screen right now, I'm just going to hit play here if this will work. Yeah, so this is a screen recording from my phone of the hyperlapse running. This was a different shot later in the evening. And like I said, we went from far to near for the shot. And you'll see as it's running, I've got on the screen here, when you're doing a hyperlapse, you can hear it clicking every this one's probably shooting one Mississippi, 2 seconds. It's on a 2-second interval. And you can see it taking a shot every time. I'm going to mute my laptop because that's going to drive me crazy. Anyway, yeah, so I've got my settings here. It's going to shoot a 4K video time lapse. It shows that I've got my white balance locked at 5400 Kelvin. My shutter speed is locked at 1/20th. My aperture is locked at f5. My ISO is locked at 1/100 or at 100. And it shows my resulting exposure value is 1/3 underexposed, which is fine, right? Because you can see the sunset is overexposed or getting close to being overexposed. That's why it's all zebraed on the left side. And then you'll also notice everything's got a red halo around it because it's in manual focus. And what that's telling me, so I set it in autofocus and then I switched it to manual after the fact so that it wouldn't shift focus. And by pure happenstance, there's a tugboat coming through the shot just as I happened. This was total luck, but it's really cool that you can see there's a tugboat moving through the frame. And I was kind of getting a little stressed whether or not my altitude was sufficient because on this one I was only at 18 meters, right? So better shot from a lower angle.
Yes, and the other thing to consider is if there is someone on the deck of that tugboat, you need to be at least 5 meters away from it.
Exactly. And you can see now at this point we're moving faster than the tug is approaching us, so it's going to be no problem. Yeah. So I was like, all right, how long can I stretch this shot before I have to abandon the shot? And if I had to abandon the shot, I'd hit the pause button or I'd hit the return to home button to cancel it. You can see we've got 3 minutes left in this time lapse. I only shot 250 frames, and I wish I had a shot more, but there's 3 minutes left on it, and the battery life remaining is 26 minutes. I've got really strong radio signal and really strong.
And you can also see how many Sorry, I was going to say you can also see how many photos are left on the SD card.
And the other important thing that we didn't talk about was disabling obstacle avoidance. So the first flight of the day, when it was bright out, it actually abandoned the time lapse on me because the sun tricked the drone into thinking it was about to hit an obstacle. So it's like obstacle nearby, canceling time lapse. And it was the sun that messed with it because there's probably a fingerprint on one of the sensors or something, and it created a smear. We talk about this on pre-flight all the time, like make sure your sensors are clean. I probably missed something and that messed it up. So it canceled the flight. So disable obstacle avoidance and make sure you're there. The other last tool, you'll notice I've got the histogram on here and you can see where the exposure bias is on the histogram. This is all going to matter for the actual shot. Okay, so this is the shot in progress and you can see it's just about done.
Oh, and there's an aircraft in the circuit too.
Oh yeah, there was. He flew over top.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, it went by. I had a scanner with me tuned to the local frequency 126.3 so that I could hear anyone in the pattern or circuit. Sorry, Finn.
You're not American. Why do you call it the American name?
Because I don't know. I just do. And anyway, I was aware of anyone that was in the circuit so that I could. And obviously, I'm at 18 meters. It's not a problem.
If you were to get conflicting aircraft in this area around the bridge, it would be float planes and helicopters because they come in at 500 feet as opposed. That aircraft in the circuit's at probably between 800 and 1,000 feet.
Exactly. Okay, so that was the footage. Now we're going to import. Now, that last shot that we did, the night shot, I haven't actually looked at the original footage yet. So
this is from scratch. We're pulling it off the card.
Yeah. So I'm going to import my card. I'm using a 2021 MacBook Pro with an M1 Pro 8 core just for to give you an idea of like the performance and everything else. Like yes, this is an expensive laptop. No, it's not the latest and greatest. You don't need the latest and greatest. You can do this on basically any Apple Silicon Mac will have no problem doing this. Finn's laptop is running I don't know, like a $500 to $800 laptop these days would be no problem to do this.
Yeah, this new was a $700 laptop.
Yeah, so it's performance-wise, you don't need anything crazy. We're going to be using Davinci Resolve. Now, Davinci Resolve has both a free and a paid tier. I'm running the paid tier, but the features I'm using are in the free tier, and the user interface is the same. We're running the latest version of 19. I haven't done this in a while, so it's going to be, we'll walk through it together. But the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to import the footage because good drone pilots are also good data managers. So on a Mac, I'm going to have, this is all my footage off the card. And you'll see in the, DJI has two different things that it dumps footage into when you shoot hyperlapses. There's the 100 media folder, which is finished videos. And then there's the hyperlapse folder, which is the raw original files that come out of it.
Can I ask you a dumb question?
No.
I've wondered this forever. What does DCIM stand for?
Man, I don't know. Digital Camera Information Manager?
I don't know, because every camera will always say DCIM, and I've always wondered what that means.
Okay, so I'm going to do a new folder for the second flight. Because I did the first one yesterday and I dumped it just to be safe because you always want to dump your card before you go. And I've got a bunch of older stuff on here also, which is bad karma. So we're going to just copy all of this. And I'm going to use the move command. Uh-oh. This is a problem with Mac and Google Drive. You can't do that. So we use Google Drive to manage all our files. Macintosh and Google Drive are not the greatest combination because Apple is very picky about where it puts footage. Where it puts files for cloud sync. It used to be like on a Windows machine, you can set an external hard drive or a cache for Google Drive. On a Mac, it's on the laptop. It's on the internal hard drive. This is my only regret with buying this laptop is I should have got a bigger one. This is only 512 gigs, which is a lot, but it's not nearly enough when you start getting into drone footage. So,
no. Or games.
Yeah. You can't play games on a Mac.
I mean, you can if you hate games.
So while that's copying, let's look at the actual footage that DJI creates out of the box when you do a hyperlapse. So these are the pre-made shots. You can just, if all you want to do is a hyperlapse and you want to just have the raw footage and be good, or not the raw, but the DJI footage
and
out
just
of the
full
box
send it
and just quick and dirty and done. This is where the video is going to end for you. So that one was probably this one. I shot some video after the fact as well. So let's see if it's this one. Nope, that's video. I don't want to ruin it.
That looked pretty good though.
It did look good.
Very vapor. Oh, there we go.
That's the earlier one, but that is out of the box, 8-bit color DJI Rec 709 footage, right? So that is the footage that we're going to be looking at. And you can see the Bodhi boat going by and you can see the exposure, but you can see how the shadows and everything else is crushed, right? and maybe the color intensity. So that's 957. Oh yeah. So, and the other thing, remember I talked about exposure being manual? I actually had to pause the time lapse and bump my exposure.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right. Because the first few frames are way too dark.
Yeah, I was like, did you take off after sunset? No.
Yeah. No, I just adjusted the exposure. This was me trying to get a tracking shot. But you can see, so there is not a lot of dynamic range in this footage, right?
No.
So you've got black, almost white, some yellow, more black, right? There's just not much definition because this is the 8-bit footage, the JPEGs. Basically, even though it's shot raw, it also created a JPEG at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's not great.
Which is standard. Most cameras will do that.
Yeah. You're going to get an individual frame for every single shutter click. And each one of these is 43 megabytes, which is why this 250 frames is 10 plus gigabytes, right? These are DNG files, which is a raw photo. While this is copying, we can do another step. We're going to go into Davinci Resolve, and we're going to set up a new project. So we've got Davinci Resolve. It's basically going to look like this. You can have a local storage for the project. We're just going to throw it on the cloud anyway. It's no different. It's just where the project gets stored. And we're going to do a new project. And we're going to call this Bridge Hyperlapse.
You mean you don't want to call every project Untitled Project 1 and then Untitled Project 2 and then Untitled Project 3?
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm using Blackmagic Cloud, I'm going to turn off some stuff here just so that it keeps it simple. These are just, Blackmagic has the ability to like sync footage between editors, which is really cool and handy, but we're not doing that for this one. Oh, there's another update. We're going to skip that for now. So this is the editor for Davinci Resolve. It looks like that copy finished in the background.
Cool.
So this is Davinci Resolve. It's a free and or paid video editor. It's really powerful and really cool. One of the neat things about it, so we've got this finder or this folder full of hyperlapses, right? These DNG files that we captured. So I'm going to drag this file, the 957 folder. This is the one that we looked at that was the boat. We're going to put it into the media pane here on Davinci. And I've got multiple tutorials, and then we've got like full-length tutorials that are going to go into our photo video course. We're going to get deeper into editing in this. So this is more of an as fast as possible. But we're going to drop 957 into Resolve, into the bin. It's going to actually import it as a single DNG file. So you're going to see 001 all the way up to 250.dng because it recognizes it as a sequence of images. Mm-hmm. So Davinci thinks it's a raw video file.
And you can see frames 250 type video.
Yep. And you can see the resolution. So it's the full 20 megapixels or 5.2 by 3.9K resolution. And you can see the frame rate that it shows. We can adjust that. So we can go to clip attributes, but let's just play it. So if I double click on it, it brings it up into the viewer and I hit play. And you'll see it's the same footage as before, but it's uncropped, right? Because the one that we looked at that was the MOV file, that was the cropped one. So I'm going to drop this into a new timeline. And we'll just everything to default. And then we're going to open that timeline. Now, we want to make this a standard video format, right? So we're going to go back to here. We're just going to change, because I didn't default it. And I'm going to go to timeline settings. Oh, it's already set to 4K. Sorry. So we're going to do a 4K timeline. And what that means is we're going to crop down or adjust the original footage. So it's at 4K. It's at 29.97 frames per second, which is what this video on YouTube will be basically. So we'll just keep everything the same there. Pixel aspect ratio, all these stuff is done automatically. So we don't need to do anything in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this footage, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to zoom it in a little bit just to find like a crop point that works for us. And then you're just going to scrub through it really quick and say, okay, yeah, that looks about what I want, right? We're making sure that there's no edges on the footage, that that it's missing anything. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically cropped there. And you'll notice it's a little jittery, Look at that. See up in the top left of the screen how there's a jet going over the sky?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wow, you did a good job.
All sheer luck. So, the one thing that I would do is I might actually do some stabilization. So I can do just basic stabilization, and I'm going to do just stabilize here. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at the entire footage and look for motion tracking. You see it did a tiny little punch in, right? So just a little bit of a punch in, which is great because this is, like I said, it's like 5K footage that we're cropping down to 4K. So we're not really losing any sharpness or detail.
Yeah, there's extra information on the outside of the image, so it can gently, very slightly move the frame around a little bit to keep everything looking smooth.
And so I got rid of that jitter, that little bit of jitter interframe, right? So it's a little smoother now.
This is a tip for any photo and video. You never want the crop that you see on your frame to be the final crop. You always want to have a little bit of extra information.
Give yourself a little bit of breathing room. Shoot a little wider.
Yeah, everybody who has just started out in photography has perfectly framed the shot in their viewfinder, and then you click the picture, and maybe you were slightly off, like the horizon was slightly off, and then when you go to fix it, it punches in and then it ruins everything.
Yeah. The whole point of us shooting this in RAW is for the latitude you get in the exposure. So we're going to jump over to the color page, and you're going to see you've got nodes and effects and filters and all that stuff. I don't care about that right now. So we're going to turn that stuff off. Nodes are, if you've ever used Adobe Photoshop, they're kind of the same idea. They're the effect of additive layers. So you start with the lower node, you can add more nodes in line, right? So I can go here and go add node and serial, and then you could have certain effects on this one and certain effects on this one, or adjustments, and it would just make it so that they're in linear fashion, or you can have them in parallel. You can get really crazy with it. For what we're doing, we're just going to do a basic exposure adjustment. So we're taking the original file, and because this is DNG or RAW, you have the camera raw capability on the left here where you can adjust the footage, or you can adjust the exposure, you can adjust the white balance. Now, I might want multiple nodes for this because you think about, like, this is a time lapse, so I want to edit this like it's a photo, right? So my foreground is really dark, my subject is really dark, and it's backlit. And maybe I want to adjust that, and maybe I also want to deal with the fact that there's like this gradient going on in the top right corner of it. So you can see over here
it looks like a vignette or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to go using, okay, so you can see the color temperature I can adjust on the fly without ruining the quality of the image, right? So we'll go back to 5400. I can adjust tint, exposure, sharpness, and this is all pulling it from the original. I think these are 12-bit raw files on it, so more color than what you can see. So I'm going to do two things. Let's focus on the foreground here. So I'm going to bring the exposure up on the foreground, and let's do like 1.8, something like that, just a little bit. And then I know I'm overexposing the sunset in this right now. So I'm going to just make sure that the bottom makes sense to what the shot is, and it's probably a bit too much. It's kind of the limit to what I can do without clipping, right? So on the side here, on the right side, I've got scopes, and the scopes are going to tell me, okay, the red's hitting the top at 1023, that's starting to clip. As everything goes up to the top line of the scope, that means it's clipped, it's overexposed. So that's probably the best I can do there. And then I can bring the highlights down and kind of flatten everything. And you can see how it crushes it back down, and I can apply a bit more exposure to it as well. This is really coarse adjustment. I can bring the shadows up, and you'll see how everything gets lifted a bit more.
This is the classic Finlayhe edit. Highlight 0, shadows up. And then when I'm doing it in Lightroom, it's highlight 0, shadows up, add dehaze, full send.
So lift is like bringing up all your blacks, just pushing them up, right? So you can see how everything goes really flat and really contrasty, and the bottom of your scope is gone. So you don't want that. you don't want it to go right to 0 in black because that crushes everything. It goes below 0. But you also want to find like a floor that makes sense. Gain is your top end, right? So I can bring my gain down, and that's going to adjust my peaking. And then contrast is the difference between them, right? So if I want it to be really flat, you look at the scope, how it gets really skinny, right? That's a low contrast image. If I want it to be really high contrast, now it's extremes. So I'm finding the same value for that. We can pump colors and make it look a little bit more out of this world. Like maybe we want it to. Like it's a cool sunset, so why not? Yeah, let's do it. And then same with saturation, right? You can really blow it out if you really want, or you can keep it somewhere reasonable. So somewhere a little bit more saturation. Now, so we've pushed shadows, and that's actually done a pretty good job of holding the image together. Because the other thing I was thinking about doing is you can do tracking and you can do gradients on your adjustment. So I could say that only the bottom half of the image is going to have this effect applied to it, or only the top half. And that's way beyond the scope of what we're doing today.
Right.
So,
is it similar to like using a mask in an Adobe program?
Yeah, gradient mask. So if you wanted to get into that, it's in the tracker, and you could do either a linear or a gradient, or you could also have it track and motion track it as well. So if I wanted a gradient mask, for example, you can then apply that gradient mask and say, this is only going to apply to here, and then I can mask it one way or the other. Yeah, so now you'll see in the tiny little dot there that...
yeah, there's something on it.
Yeah, so that's the gradient, whether it's going to apply. But because we applied all the exposure values to the raw footage, it's going to apply across the board.
Yeah, so this is where you could use a node and keep the raw footage as just a layer, and then you clone the node, and then you do everything on the node so you're not...
Yeah.
Now,
we basically said for all footage through this pipeline, it's going to look like this and be oversaturated. But then if I now needed to add more to it.
The thing, though, is that while we're editing this, it's not affecting the original file.
It's a non-destructive edit.
So you don't have to worry about if you are editing on the raw file. You don't have to worry about if you mess up and ruining your shot or ruining your original file.
Exactly.
What this program is doing is saving the changes. It's not saving, or it's not changing the original file.
Yeah, so now we can get rid of the mask. So let's just reset this. We don't need the mask for what we're doing right now. What it would be is, let's just add another node in serial. And let's say on this one, we're going to do a gradient. And we can see which way it's going. And then you can adjust the softness of the...
So this is how you could do something like maybe miniature. Could you use miniature effect for something like this?
Yeah, and you could apply a blur, right?
Yeah.
So you apply the masking first, and then you apply the effect. So where's blur? Here. Nope, that's not it. That's color slice. That's a new one for me. Blur and sharpness. So you can apply, you can apply it. Oops. So now you'll see that the blur is only on the top half because there's a gradient applied to the gradient. And if I move the gradient, it's going to apply the footage. So if I wanted a miniature effect of the boat, I would have to choose like somewhere past the point of focal and then adjust it.
Yeah, this is without glasses mode.
Exactly. So, but then as soon as I turn that node off, the effect disappears. Right. So, yeah. So way beyond this, and this would be something that like I'm not a grading expert in Resolve at all. So I'm not the resource for this at this point, but we will build it out for you and structure it and actually script it so it's not just in all over the place on the app. Anyway, so there's the footage. And like you said, let's turn the raw exposure, well, because now it's raw footage, you basically have where's color on, color off? Here it is. Oh, because it's raw, it's going to show you the full version. So we've got the footage now a little bit more vibrant, a little more color grade to it, right? Remember what we started with. Let's go back to Finder. There's the original raw file out of it.
Yeah, so fewer colors. The sunset pops not quite as much.
Yeah, and we've brought back the shadow on the bridge as well, without creating a ton of grain. If we zoom in, you can see that there's not a ton of grain or noise in the footage.
The more you pump shadows, the more grainy your image is going to get.
Yeah. So the last thing you could do, because again, this is a high resolution 4K RAW. Let's go to fit. You can do a dynamic zoom, or you could do a keyframe zoom, right? So say, like, yeah, it's a wide angle shot of the bridge is what we're doing here, right? But maybe we want to keyframe in and draw focus to the boat. Yeah. What you could do then is you could say, here, set some keyframes and set another keyframe here. And you could zoom in a little bit. This is going to be jarring, but
it will be instructive.
It'll be instructive. And then you set another keyframe here, and you start zooming out. And then you set another keyframe here to zoom back out to 1.
So you were clicking to set the keyframe, right?
Yes.
I see, yeah.
Oops. So yeah, it's going to create a digital zoom effect. So we'll just play it.
This is maybe a little bit of an aggressive zoom.
It's a little coarse.
Yeah.
I kind of blew it. Whoop. So
it was instructive.
Yeah. So we're just going to reset the keyframes for everything across the board here. And we're just going to zoom it in a little bit so that we crop down to what we want. And I'm going to bring the framing so it's not dead center, right? You definitely
rule of thirds.
Want your third line there. Somewhere about there. That's probably the best I could do. If I wanted a little more, I'd have to do that. But then you're still, like, I want lots of sky for this shot.
But not too much sky.
Yeah, so that's probably, it feels a little claustrophobic there.
Yeah, I would pitch the camera down a little bit. Because you've got a black bar on the top there.
Yeah, right about there. So your horizon is still below the center line. It's in a third line. Let's try that. So hit play. Not bad. Boat's going to go out of frame on the left side, but yeah, so that's just me. It added a little bit of gimbal tilt at the end. So it keyframes the position of the drone, the angle of the gimbal, and the rotation of the drone as well. So those are 3 things you need to consider when you're setting up your keyframes. Then when we're done, we're going to hit render. We're going to set this to YouTube 4K for quality, and we'll just throw it on the desktop. Or there, that's fine. And hit add to render, and hit render. And again, it's
a short video, so it doesn't take a long time to render. And it's just one video. If we were layering lots of other stuff or had other effects, it would take longer.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll just go reveal in Finder. And there's the final footage.
Look at that.
And you'll notice that you can see the de-warping going on. I would want to play with the motion.
And doesn't this one also automatically does camera lens correction and chromatic aberration, right?
Yeah, you can adjust. There's a lot of features you can get into, but the idea is like, this is watch the bridge pillars. Notice how they kind of dance around a little bit. That's the motion compensation.
Oh yeah, I see.
Struggling there is a little bit of gimbal jiggle, so you'd want to get into that. But you take that footage against the card 957, this one, and look at the jiggling in that. It's more static, but there is interframe jiggling.
Yes.
So, and it shows a different crop angle compared to the one I did. So it's always something you're going to want to, like, you've got choices is the point of all this, is to edit your raw footage and actually be able to create something that you want. So I would go in and spend a bit more time. And this is the whole point of, like what we said, if you just want a time lapse right now for social media and it's good to go and you want the kind of the quick and dirty, use the one that comes out of the drone. But the point of shooting raw is not to fill your hard drive for no reason. It's to give you that latitude and control so you have that creative capability to finish the footage. Then that's it.
And that's how you get that shot.
So that has been how to shoot, import, and edit raw DNG footage from the DJI Mavic 3 into a hyperlapse using free tools like Davinci Resolve.
Mhm.
So
If you like this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe. If you
Yeah.
have a question or a comment about anything we talked about today, you can drop it in the comments. We really enjoy responding to comments. We get a kick out of it, actually.
yeah, and if you want more information about editing in DaVinci Resolve and shooting video and type hyperlapses, check out our photo and video course where we go into more depth about this kind of stuff. And we're always adding more content to it. Or we've got long form content like shooting a hyperlapse with a Mini 3 Pro on Coastal Drone Pro monthly. So you can check back for long behind the scenes episodes.
And we also, at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of this season of the Coastal Drone podcast, we did do videos specifically about photo and video, which go more into detail about some of the conceptual aspects behind photo and video.
Yeah, so the technical background, exposure triangle, why white balance is important, all the things we've talked about today, more in depth, it's there as well. So check that out.
All right.
Thanks a lot for watching, guys.
Have a great rest of your day.
Take care.